Ethan Campbell arrived at his mansion one Wednesday afternoon without notifying anyone. It wasn't his custom to arrive unannounced. His custom was to arrive on Friday evenings, when the staff had already received instructions by email, and everything was in the specific order he expected to find. But the meeting up north had been cancelled 3 hours in advance, and the next available flight was at 2 p.m. And Ethan wasn't the type of man who waited in airports when there was another option. He entered through the front door with his briefcase in hand, his mind still on the contract he hadn't finished reviewing on the plane, and stopped, not because of anything he could see, but because of something he didn't expect to feel. The house smelled different. Not the neutral, controlled scent of the climate control systems that maintained the mansion at a temperature and air quality his administrator considered optimal. There was something else. Fresh flowers. Not the decorative flowers that were changed weekly according to protocol, but flowers someone had placed somewhere nearby because they wanted them there. And something more difficult to name. Something Ethan took a moment to identify because he hadn't encountered it in that house for a long time. Something human. He left his briefcase at the entrance and walked towards the wing where his mother's room was. Eleanor Campbell had been diagnosed 8 months ago with advanced cancer. Ethan had paid for the best oncologists in the country, the most comprehensive treatment available, 2 nurses per shift, and a medical administrator who coordinated every aspect of her care. Everything was covered, everything was managed. Ethan reviewed medical reports weekly from wherever he was and gave instructions by email when necessary. He was fulfilling his duties as a son. That's what he told himself when the thought of his mother appeared in the spaces between his meetings. The door to the room was ajar. He approached silently, not with the intention of eavesdropping, but because his steps on the marble hallway were quiet and no one had heard him arrive. He peered in. What he saw stopped him completely. His mother was sitting in the chair by the window, eyes closed and head slightly tilted forward. In front of her, kneeling on the floor, was a young woman Ethan didn't immediately recognize. Dark hair, pulled back, simple work clothes, her hands moving with a delicacy that wasn't the technical precision of someone trained for a procedure, but that of someone doing something with genuine care because the person in front of her mattered. The young woman was shaving his mother's head. The last few strands that had survived chemotherapy fell slowly. Ethan looked at the young woman's face. She wept silently. Not the ostentatious weeping of someone who wants to be seen crying, but the quiet crying of someone feeling something they couldn't and didn't want to contain, but also wouldn't turn into a scene. And his mother, Eleanor, who in recent months had worn an expression Ethan associated with the resignation of someone who has accepted pain as their permanent companion, had her eyes closed and a peace on her face he hadn't seen in a long time. She held the young woman's wrist with her hand, not like someone gripping another to prevent them from leaving. Rather, like someone holding something, needing the other to know they were also being held. Ethan didn't enter, didn't say anything. He stood in the doorway for an immeasurable time, looking at something he didn't know how to name, but which produced a sensation in the center of his chest that he also couldn't name at that moment. It wasn't tenderness exactly. It was something more uncomfortable than tenderness. It was the recognition that what he was seeing was something he hadn't given, that everything he had paid for, organized, and coordinated from a distance hadn't produced that. That in that room, with fresh flowers, the scent of tea, and the hands of a stranger, his mother had something his contracts hadn't bought. He withdrew slowly, went to his study, sat behind his desk, and opened his laptop by reflex, by the automatic need to do something concrete, when what he was feeling had no concrete form, but he read nothing. He stared at the screen with the image of his mother, and the crying young woman and Eleanor's small hand on that wrist. He wondered when he had last held his mother's hand. He couldn't remember. That was the problem. He couldn't remember. The next morning, Ethan called his administrator, Miss Albright, and asked for the complete record of the household staff. Miss Albright brought it in 20 minutes with the efficiency of someone who anticipates that when the principal asks for something in that specific tone, it's best not to make him wait. She explained the names, shifts, and assigned responsibilities. When she reached Victoria Davies, Ethan raised his hand. That one. What exactly does she do? General cleaning, sir. Common areas, 2nd floor, coordination with laundry. When was she hired? 6 months ago. Tell her to come to my study at 10. Victoria, or Tori, arrived promptly. She was 26 years old and carried herself like someone who knew she had been called in for something that wouldn't be easy and had decided beforehand that it wouldn't make her shrink. Ethan looked at her from behind the desk. Sit down. She sat. I saw what you were doing yesterday in my mother's room. Tori didn't respond immediately, not with guilt or nervousness, but with the calm of someone waiting to hear the rest before deciding what to say. "You were hired to clean," Ethan continued. "Not to care for my mother, not to take on responsibilities that belong to the medical staff. I understand. You understand. I understand what you're telling me," Tori said. "But, if you'll allow me, I'd also like to tell you what I saw." Ethan didn't respond, which could have been interpreted as permission. Eleanor hadn't had her sheets changed in 3 nights after sweating through fevers. One of those nights she vomited, and I called the duty nurse 4 times before she arrived. She spent 40 minutes alone. Tori paused briefly. Her hair was starting to fall out, and every morning I found it on her pillow. No one talked about it with her. No one asked how she was beyond the medical report. "There are 2 nurses specifically hired," Ethan interjected. "They do their medical work," Tori said. "They do it well, but medical work and companionship aren't the same. Eleanor didn't just need someone to monitor her blood pressure. She needed someone to be with her." Ethan looked at her. There was something in her manner of speaking that wasn't insolence. It was precision. She said exactly what she needed to say, without embellishment or apology, and without the defensive attitude of someone. "That's not your responsibility," Ethan said. "No, but it was necessary." Before Ethan could respond, the study door opened. Eleanor, in a wheelchair, pushed by the duty nurse who had the look of someone who would have preferred this not happen, entered the study with the expression of someone who had heard enough from the hallway. "Mom, don't you need?" "Yes, I need," Eleanor said with a voice that had lost volume with illness but not authority. "Ethan, that young woman is the only person in this house who has treated me like a human being in recent months. There's a full medical team. Don't talk to me about the medical team. My body aches, my hair falls out, I'm scared at night, and sometimes I just need someone to sit with me." She paused to breathe. "Tori sits with me. You send emails." The silence in the study had the specific weight of truths that cannot be refuted because they are exact. "If you let her go," Eleanor said, "I'll go too." Ethan looked at his mother, then at Tori. Tori said nothing. She didn't need to say anything. The situation had already said everything. "No one is going anywhere," Ethan finally said, in the voice of someone who has lost an argument and knows it, and is choosing not to prolong what is already finished. Eleanor nodded, said something to the nurse, and left the study. Tori rose to leave as well. "Tori," Ethan said. She stopped. "What you do for her, keep doing it." It wasn't a thank you, not yet. It was something clumsier and more honest than a thank you. It was the minimum acknowledgement of someone who had just understood they were wrong but didn't yet know how else to say it. Tori nodded and left. Ethan remained alone in his study. He opened his laptop. He had 47 unread emails. He stared at them for a moment, closed the laptop, and went to find his mother. Ethan spent that afternoon in his mother's room for the first time in weeks. It wasn't easy. Eleanor was resting when he arrived, and he sat in the chair by the window, unsure what to do with his hands or with the silence. It was the kind of silence he hadn't had to inhabit in a long time, because his life was built on the elimination of silence. There was always an email, a call, a document, something to justify not simply being present without concrete purpose. Here there was none of that, just his mother sleeping and him sitting, watching her breathe. When Eleanor opened her eyes and saw him there, her expression cycled through several emotions in a second. Surprise, something that might have been joy if it hadn't been so mixed with something more cautious. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I came to be with you. Don't you have meetings?" "I cancelled them." Eleanor looked at him with the direct assessment of a woman who has known her son for 51 years and knows how to distinguish when he's telling the truth from when he's saying what he thinks she wants to hear. "You cancelled them, or you rescheduled them?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. "I rescheduled them for later," he admitted. Eleanor let out something that wasn't exactly a laugh, but resembled one. "At least you're honest." They sat in silence for a while, a different kind of silence than before. Not the uncomfortable silence of the beginning, but the silence of two people learning to be together in the same space, neither yet knowing how to do it well. "How long has Tori been here?" Ethan asked. 6 months. "When did she start staying with you beyond her work?" Eleanor thought. "Since the 2nd month, I had a difficult night, and she was cleaning the hallway when she heard me. She came in without anyone calling her. She stayed until I fell asleep." "Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor looked at him. "Ethan, when was the last time you called to ask how I was? Not for the medical report. How I was." Ethan didn't answer because the answer was too long to be comfortable and too short to be sufficient. "Tori buys flowers with her own money," Eleanor continued. "You knew that. She doesn't bring them on Mondays. She says the week should start with something living in the room." She paused. "She reads aloud to me when I can't sleep. Not medical textbooks, but novels, the ones I ask her for." Ethan looked at the bedside table. There was a book with a paper bookmark on page 30-something. Next to it, flowers in a glass vase. Not florist flowers, but market flowers. The kind someone chooses because they find them pretty, not because they're on the household expense list. I asked for the records this morning, Ethan said. What records? Of the staff, Tori's hours, the expenses she's recorded in the house. Eleanor looked at him. Why? To understand. Eleanor nodded slowly. And what did you find? I haven't reviewed all of them yet. He paused. But Miss Albright told me there are nights not in the record. Nights Tori stayed without an assigned shift, because she didn't want anyone to ask her to, Eleanor said. She did it on her own. Ethan looked at the book on the nightstand. What is she reading with you? Eleanor smiled slightly. A well-loved historical novel about a woman who loses everything and starts over 3 times. Do you like it? I love it. Tori says the best stories are the ones that show that endings aren't endings, but beginnings that don't yet know they are. Ethan looked at his mother. There was color in her face that afternoon. Not the color of perfect health exactly, but the color of someone who is truly alive and not just functioning. How are you, Mom? He asked. Not the report, you. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Today, I'm well, she said. You're here, and that helps more than you know. Ethan nodded. He said nothing more, but stayed until his mother fell asleep again. And when he left the room and walked to his study to review Tori's records, something within him was shifting slowly, with the resistance of things that have been in one position for a long time and don't yet know they need to move. What he found in those records would finish moving him. The records told a story no one had written for him to read. Ethan reviewed them in his study that night, with the same attention he gave to financial reports, column by column, date by date, hour by hour. Victoria Davies, 6 months in the mansion. Official shift Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Saturdays until noon. But the house access records, automatically saved by the security system, showed something else. Tuesday, September 3rd, registered exit at 6:01 p.m., return at 11 p.m. No assigned shift, no registered payment. Thursday, 17th, no registered exit. She had slept in the house when it wasn't her duty shift. Monday, 24th, entry at 6 a.m., 2 hours before her official shift. Ethan counted the irregular nights. 17 inches, 6 months. 17 nights Tori had been in that house without anyone asking her, without registered payment, without any reason other than that she chose to stay. He looked for the household staff expense records. Each employee had a minor expense account for house-related items. Tori's showed purchases at a local pharmacy, medications not on the official doctor's list, vitamin supplements, a small humidifier. He called Miss Albright. The medications Tori bought at the pharmacy, what exactly are they? Miss Albright paused for a moment. They're not on the house account, sir. She paid for them out of her own pocket. The pharmacy confirmed she has a personal account there. She buys approximately every 2 weeks. Ethan hung up. Tori was paying for medications out of her own salary. Not expensive extras, but small things. A milder pain reliever for nights, when the prescribed one was too strong. A ginger tea Eleanor had mentioned, helped with her nausea. Peppermint lozenges for when the treatment left a bad taste in her mouth. Things not on any medical protocol. Things someone only notices when they are present. Ethan closed the records, stood up, and went to the hallway. The mansion was silent at that hour. The night staff in their positions, the lights low in the corridors. He passed his mother's room. The door was ajar, and there was a soft light inside. He peered in. Tori was sitting in the chair by the bed, reading in a low voice. His mother was sleeping. Tori's voice was low enough not to awaken her and clear enough that if Eleanor opened her eyes in the middle of the night, she would find the sound before finding the darkness. Ethan stood in the hallway listening without entering. He didn't hear the content of what she was reading. He heard the tone, the cadence of someone who had read enough to know that words have their own rhythm and that rhythm matters as much as meaning. He went to his room, sat on the edge of the bed, and thought of his mother in her late 60s, telling him she was proud of what he had built. He thought of the last birthday he had spent with her, which was 3 years ago, and all the intervening birthdays he had celebrated with a call from some airport in the world. He thought of what Tori had done in 6 months without anyone asking her, and he thought of the 51 years he had had to do something similar, and hadn't. The next day, he arrived early in the dining room where Tori was preparing his mother's breakfast. She saw him enter and didn't change anything she was doing. She continued cutting the fruit into specific bite-sized pieces that Eleanor could chew without discomfort, since the treatment had made her mouth sensitive. "I found the records," Ethan said. "Which records?" The nights, the medications. Tori kept cutting. Okay, she said. It's not okay. You're using your own money for household expenses. They're small things. The amount doesn't matter. It's not your responsibility. Tori put the knife down on the board and looked at him directly. Do you want me to stop doing it? Ethan didn't answer immediately. I want you to give me a list of everything you've spent so I can reimburse you. It's not necessary. Yes, it is, Tori. I didn't do it to be reimbursed. I know, Ethan said. That's why I'm going to reimburse you. Tori looked at him for a moment, then nodded, and continued with breakfast. Ethan poured himself coffee and stayed in the kitchen while she finished preparing the tray. Not because he needed the coffee, but because for the first time, in a long time, he was not in a hurry to be somewhere else. Ethan cancelled 2 meetings that week. He didn't postpone them, he cancelled them. His assistant emailed him 3 times to confirm he had understood correctly, and he replied yes, each time with the brevity of someone who doesn't want to leave room for negotiation. He spent the afternoons in his mother's room. The first few days were clumsy, in the way that reunions between people who love each other but have forgotten how to be together are clumsy. Ethan didn't know what to say. His mother also didn't know what to expect from him in this new format. They had had very defined roles for years. He called, she updated. He promised to come soon, she said not to worry. Now he was there, and neither of them had the script. Tori appeared that afternoon with 2 cups of tea and placed them on the table without anyone asking her. She looked at the scene, assessed the awkward silence with her ability to read rooms, and said, Eleanor, let me tell you what happened yesterday with the on-call doctor. Tell me. And she began to tell a story about a misunderstanding with medical shifts that, in Tori's hands, became genuinely funny. Eleanor laughed. Ethan listened, and suddenly all 3 were talking without anyone having had to decide it was time to talk. Ethan noticed it. Tori hadn't entered to fill the silence out of her own discomfort. She had entered because she saw that the silence was an obstacle for 2 people who wanted to connect but didn't know how, and she had given them an opening. That night, when his mother was already asleep, Ethan found Tori in the kitchen washing the cups. How do you do it? He asked. She looked at him. What? Knowing what people need before they ask for it. Tori thought about the answer as she dried a cup. My mother was sick, she said. Not here, but in our house, which was much smaller than this. And I learned that when someone is sick, what they need most isn't to have things resolved for them. It's for someone to look at them, for someone to be in the same room without needing anything important to happen. Ethan looked at her. Did your mother get better? Tori paused for a moment. No, she said. She died 4 years ago. Of what? Lung cancer. Ethan felt something he couldn't quite name at that moment. But it had to do with an image that was completing itself, an image of Tori that had begun to form with the records of the nights and the medications paid for out of her own pocket, and which now had a context that changed everything. She had treatment. Too late, Tori said. By the time we got to the doctor, there wasn't much left to do. We didn't have the resources for preventative screenings. She said it without bitterness, with the calm of someone who has processed something long enough to be able to say it without pain obscuring the words. If we had gotten there sooner, maybe it would have been different. Ethan looked at the clean cup in Tori's hand. Is that why you care for my mother this way? Tori looked at him directly. I care for Eleanor because Eleanor deserves to be cared for, she said. But yes, I know what it means to see your mother sick without being able to do anything, and when I can do something, I do it. She went to hang up the cups. Ethan stayed in the kitchen after she left. He thought of Tori's mother dying in a small house without the screenings that would have detected the cancer in time. He thought of his own mother in a mansion with 2 nurses and top-tier oncologists, and him reviewing reports from airports. He thought of the difference between resources and using them for what matters, and he thought of all the people who had neither. That night he didn't sleep well, but it wasn't because of work. Miss Albright arrived on a Monday with an expression Ethan recognized. It was the expression of someone bringing information she considered important, and who had calculated that not bringing it would be worse than bringing it. Miss Albright had managed the mansion for 12 years, with the efficiency of someone who had learned that her job was to solve problems before they reached the principal, and that when they did arrive anyway, it was because they were too big for her to solve alone. There's something I need to report, she said. Sit down. Miss Albright sat with a folder on her lap. This morning, Miss Fournier arrived. Ethan's expression didn't change. Isabelle Fournier, 34, entrepreneur. They had been in a relationship for 2 years that was more convenient than deep, and which both had maintained with the comfort of those who share social circles and have no urgent reasons to end something that isn't bothering them. What happened? She came unannounced while you were with Eleanor. She spoke to the staff. Miss Albright paused briefly. She asked about Tori specifically. What did she ask? How long she's been here? What exactly she does? Why she sleeps in the house more than her shift indicates? Ethan looked at her. Who gave her that information? No one gave it to her directly. She checked the shift board in the kitchen. She spoke to the duty nurse. Where is she now? In the garden. She said she was waiting for you. Ethan found Isabel on the terrace with a coffee someone had brought her, and the posture of someone who had decided in advance how she was going to handle a conversation. Why didn't you let me know you were coming? He asked. I wanted to surprise you. And? Isabel put her coffee on the table. Ethan, who is that girl? Victoria Davies. Household staff. Household staff doesn't sleep in the house 17 nights without an assigned shift. My mother needs her. Your mother has 2 nurses. The nurses do their job. Tori does something else. Isabel looked at him with the cold assessment of someone who is intelligent and knows that intelligence sometimes finds what it wasn't looking for. What exactly? She keeps her company. She listens to her. She reads to her. She buys what she needs with her own money. He paused. Things I wasn't doing. Isabel picked up her purse. Ethan, that girl is taking advantage of the situation. An employee who ingratiates herself with the family when the boss isn't around, who creates emotional dependence in a sick, vulnerable woman. That has a name. It has several names, Ethan said. The one you're giving it, and the correct one. And what's the correct one? That she's the only person in this house who has done what should have been done from the beginning. Isabel looked at him for a moment. You're defending her by telling the truth, Ethan. That woman is a domestic employee. She's not family. She's not a friend. She's someone who earns a salary for being here and has clearly decided she can occupy spaces that don't belong to her. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He thought of Tori kneeling on the floor, shaving his mother's head with careful hands and silent tears. He thought of the 17 nights without pay, of the medications bought out of her own pocket, of the story of her mother dying of cancer, in a small house without the resources that would have changed the outcome. He thought of Isabel, who had visited the mansion 4 times in 8 months, and in none of them had spent more than 20 minutes in Eleanor's room. Tori occupies exactly the space that belongs to her, he said, the one no one else was occupying. Isabel picked up her purse. When you decide what's more important, call me. She left without waiting for a response. Ethan remained on the terrace looking at the garden. He didn't feel what he expected to feel. There was no relief or guilt, nor any of the things someone who had just had that conversation should feel. He felt clarity, the kind of clarity that isn't comfortable but is necessary, and that arrives when one finally stops confusing convenience with truth. He went to his mother's room. Tori was arranging the week's flowers in the glass vase. Eleanor watched her with that calm expression Ethan had learned to recognize as the expression his mother had when she was exactly where she wanted to be. Ethan sat in the chair. None of the 3 spoke of Isabel. There was no need. The critical night arrived unannounced on a Tuesday. Ethan was in his study, reviewing contracts when he heard the sound. He didn't immediately know what it was. A thump, then silence, then Tori's voice calling the nurse with an urgency that wasn't panic, but something more controlled and therefore more alarming. He reached his mother's room in 20 seconds. Eleanor was on the floor beside the bed. She had gotten up alone in the early morning, and her legs hadn't responded as she expected. She was breathing with difficulty. It wasn't the breathing of someone who had fallen. It was the breathing of someone whose lungs were making an effort that shouldn't be necessary. Tori was already on the floor beside her. She hadn't moved her. She had learned enough in these months to know that moving someone in that condition, without knowing exactly what happened, could worsen things. She held Eleanor's head with one hand and with the other dialed the on-call doctor's number. Ethan knelt on the other side. Mom. Eleanor opened her eyes, looked at him. Something in her gaze was different, more strained, as if holding her eyes open required more effort than usual. I'm here, Ethan said. The nurse arrived. Then the on-call doctor, who lived 10 minutes away, and arrived in 8 because Tori had been clear on the phone about what she was seeing. For the next hour, Ethan didn't move from the room. The doctor stabilized Eleanor, a respiratory crisis related to fluid accumulation. Not the first, he explained, but more intense than previous ones. They settled her in bed with supplemental oxygen and adjusted medication. When the doctor and nurse left to prepare the additional equipment they had requested, Ethan and Tori were left alone with Eleanor, who was breathing more easily but sleeping with the exhaustion of someone who had just fought a small battle. Ethan stood by the bed, his hands unsure where to go. Tori was in the chair adjusting the room temperature because the doctor had indicated it should be kept specific. This had happened before? Ethan asked. Once, less intensely. Why wasn't I notified? Tori looked at him. Medical administration was notified. It's in that week's report. Ethan thought of the reports he read every week on the plane or between meetings. Columns of data, levels, medications, indicators. He had read that report. He hadn't understood what it meant in real terms. "What do I do?" he asked. The question came out before he could stop it. It wasn't the type of question Ethan Campbell asked. It was the question of someone who had suddenly understood that being present wasn't enough if he didn't know what to do with that presence. Tori didn't smile or take advantage of the moment. "Sit next to her," she said. "If she wakes up and you're there, that's enough for now." Ethan sat. Tori turned off the main light and left only the small bedside lamp. She brought an extra blanket and placed it over Ethan's shoulders without him asking, because the room was cold, and he was wearing a work shirt, and no one else had thought of that. Then she sat in the other chair on the other side of the bed and stayed there. They didn't speak for a long time. The oxygen made its soft, steady sound. Eleanor breathed more regularly. The clock on the wall marked 1, then 2, then 3 a.m. At some point, Ethan realized he was holding his mother's hand. He didn't remember deciding to do it. It had simply happened with the naturalness of things the body does when the mind finally stops controlling everything. He looked at Tori on the other side of the bed. She was awake, watching Eleanor with the quiet attention of someone who had spent many nights like this and had learned to inhabit them without being consumed by them. "How did you manage it when it was your mother?" Ethan asked in a low voice. Tori paused for a moment. "Badly," she said. "I did it very badly because there was no one to teach me how to do it well." She paused. "But I was present. I did do that. Until the end, I was present." Ethan looked at his mother sleeping with the oxygen and the blanket and her small hand in his. "I haven't been present," he said. "No," Tori confirmed, without cruelty or excessive softness, just with the honesty that was her way of treating people. "But you're here now." 4 a.m. arrived slowly. Eleanor opened her eyes for a moment. She saw Ethan holding her hand. She saw Tori in the other chair, and closed her eyes again with an expression that wasn't resignation. It was peace. And Ethan, who had spent 51 years learning to measure the value of things in terms of performance and efficiency, understood in that room at 4 a.m. that there were things that had no monetary equivalent, and that he had been looking in the wrong place all that time. The days that followed the crisis were different, not suddenly, but slowly, with the gradualness of changes that are real, because they are not in a hurry to prove themselves. Ethan began to organize his agenda differently. He didn't eliminate work. That was neither possible nor necessary, but he learned to set limits with the same firmness with which he had previously set limits on everything else. Mornings in the mansion, afternoons with his mother when possible, nights without flights unless absolutely necessary. His assistant took a week to stop asking him if he was sure every time he cancelled something. Eleanor noticed the change before commenting on it. One afternoon when Ethan arrived at her room and found Tori reading aloud, he sat down without interrupting and listened to the rest of the chapter with them. When Tori closed the book, Eleanor looked at him with an expression Ethan hadn't seen in his mother since he was a child. Pride, not the pride of professional success that she had always shown with a certain caution, aware that such pride cost her son something in terms of pressure. This was different. It was the pride of seeing someone being who they always should have been. "How do you feel today?" Ethan asked. "Better than yesterday," Eleanor said. "Worse than a year ago." She said it without drama, "But I'm okay." "What do you need?" Eleanor looked at him. "Right now, nothing. I have your hand, and I have Tori reading. What more could a woman need?" Tori smiled at the book without looking up. Ethan learned things those weeks that hadn't been in any contract or report. He learned that his mother slept better when someone was in the room, even if they weren't talking. He learned that she was bothered by the smell of a certain disinfectant the nurses used, and that Tori had replaced it weeks ago with something milder. He learned that at 5 p.m., Eleanor had a burst of energy that lasted exactly an hour, and that was the time for conversations that mattered. Tori taught him these things without making it seem like she was teaching him anything. She mentioned them in passing in the context of other things, and he stored them with the attention of someone who understood that every piece of information about his mother was also a debt he was paying late. One afternoon, Ethan was in the kitchen when Tori arrived with a list of medications that needed replenishment. "Give it to Miss Albright," he said. "I already did. I just wanted to let you know why there's one that takes 3 days to arrive, and if we order it today, it will be here before it runs out." "How do you know how much is left?" "I check every week." Ethan looked at her. "You were doing that before I arrived too?" "Yes." "Why?" Tori thought about the answer. "Because running out of medication in the middle of the night is the kind of problem that can be avoided if someone pays attention. And that kind of avoided problem doesn't appear in any report because it never occurred." Ethan nodded. Tori, I want to talk to you about something. She waited. There's a foundation I started years ago for health issues. I never developed it as I should have. He paused. I'm thinking of changing that, focusing it on access to early diagnosis for people without resources. Tori didn't respond immediately. Why are you telling me? Because your mother died because she didn't get a diagnosis in time, Ethan said, and because you've spent 6 months showing me what it means to do things right with what you have. I want the foundation to do something similar, but on a larger scale. What do you want from me? Your opinion, what you think works and what doesn't, what you would have needed when your mother got sick. Tori looked at him for a long moment. You're asking me to collaborate on this. I'm asking you to tell me the truth about what matters. That's what you've done since you arrived, and it's the only thing I need. Tori nodded slowly. I'll think about it. That's enough. That afternoon, Eleanor found both of them in the living room, reviewing foundation documents with coffee cooling on the table, because neither had remembered to drink it. She looked at them from the doorway with her wheelchair. She didn't say anything, but the expression she wore was that of someone seeing something she had waited to see for a long time and was no longer sure would happen. And that expression was worth more than anything she could have said. Eleanor called Ethan one November morning, not with the bell by her bed she used to call the nurses. She called him directly on the phone, as when he was young, and she needed to tell him something that couldn't wait. Ethan was in his study. He answered on the first ring. Are you busy? No. What do you need? Come. He found his mother sitting in the chair by the window with the morning light streaming in directly and her hands in her lap, with that specific stillness of people who have decided to say something difficult and are waiting for the exact moment. He sat in front of her. How are you? Listen to me, Eleanor said. Ethan looked at her. The doctor spoke with me alone yesterday. She paused. Things aren't going to get better, Ethan. We both knew that, though neither of us had said it aloud. Ethan didn't respond. What's left is time. I don't know how much. No one knows for sure, but what I do know is how I want that time to be. Mom, let me finish. He remained silent. I want you to be present. Not organized, not coordinated, not informed, but present in this room, with this conversation at this moment. Her eyes looked at him with the directness they had always had, and which the illness had not been able to take away. Can you do that? Yes. Don't answer quickly. Think about it. Ethan thought about it. He thought about the pending contracts, the partners awaiting decisions, the enormous machinery that was his professional life, and that continued to turn regardless of where he was. And he thought of his mother at 78, with her time counted, looking at him from the chair by the window. Yes, he said again. I can do that. Eleanor nodded. There's something else. Tell me. Tori. Ethan waited. That young woman has given more than she should have, and she's never asked for anything. When I'm gone, I don't want her to disappear from your life like staff disappear when a contract ends. She won't disappear. How do you know? Because I'm going to make sure she doesn't. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment with her way of verifying if words had real weight or were just words. She must have found something that convinced her because she nodded slowly. Good. Ethan stood to leave, and she stopped him with a word. Ethan turned around. I'm proud of who you are now, Eleanor said. Not of what you built, but of who you are now, here in this room. Ethan didn't respond because some sentences don't need a response. He approached, knelt by the chair, and hugged her with the care of someone embracing something fragile and precious. Eleanor placed her hand on his head as she used to when he was a child. They stayed like that for a moment. Outside, the garden was filled with the cold November light, and the birds made their usual noise, completely indifferent to what was happening inside. Tori found Ethan that afternoon in the garden. He was sitting on the stone bench by the fountain, his gaze unfocused, and cold coffee in his hand. Tori recognized that posture. It was the posture of someone who had just had a conversation that needed time to settle. She sat on the other bench without saying anything. Several minutes passed in silence. She spoke with you, Tori finally said. It wasn't a question. Yes. How is she? Calm, Ethan said. Calmer than I am. Tori nodded. Eleanor has been making peace with things for weeks. It's a process she started alone before you arrived. What changed when you started being present is that she no longer has to do it completely alone. Ethan looked at her. How do you manage it? What? Knowing she'll be gone after everything you've given. Tori thought about the answer with her usual honesty. I don't fully manage it, she said. There are difficult moments. But I learned with my mother that the pain of losing someone doesn't disappear if you keep your distance. It only gets postponed and grows. It's better to be close, even if it hurts. Distance protects you from feeling, and feeling is the only thing that gives meaning to being present. Ethan looked at the fountain. My entire life has been distance, he said. I thought it was efficiency. It seemed like it from the outside and from the inside. Tori looked at him. From the inside, you looked like a man who had learned not to need anything so as not to risk losing it. Ethan didn't respond. It was the most accurate description anyone had ever given him of himself, and it came from a 26-year-old woman who had been in his house for 6 months and had seen him more clearly than all the people who had known him his entire life. "The foundation," he said. "I want you to lead it." Tori looked at him. "We already talked about this. We talked about you collaborating. Now I'm asking you to lead it, to build the program, to decide how it works, to do it with the same attention you give to everything else. Ethan, I don't have training in foundation management. You have something better. You know what's missing because you lived it." He paused. "Training can be acquired. What you have isn't taught." Tori remained silent for a moment. "I'll think about it seriously," she said. "That's all I ask." They stayed in the garden until the evening chill drove them inside, and neither of them spoke of what was growing between them, slowly and still nameless, because there were more important things at that moment, and because things that grow slowly don't need to be named to be real. Eleanor died on a Thursday in December before dawn. It wasn't dramatic. Ethan was in the chair by her bed, Tori in the other. The nurses had been there until midnight, and then the two had stayed alone because Eleanor had requested it the night before with the quiet clarity of someone who knows what she wants for the most important moment. She breathed slowly for hours. Ethan held her hand. Tori read in a low voice. Not necessarily for Eleanor to hear, but because the sound of the words filled the room with something alive as the patient's breathing became more spaced out. At some point, between 4 and 5 a.m., her breathing stopped without a startle, without visible pain, with the stillness of something that had decided it was enough. Ethan didn't call anyone immediately. He stayed with his mother's hand in his for an immeasurable time. Tori closed the book. Neither of them spoke. Outside, dawn was breaking very slowly. When Ethan finally stood to call the doctor, he paused in the doorway and looked at the room. Tori's flowers in the vase, the book on the bedside table, the small light from the lamp they had left on all night. "Thank you," he said without turning around. Tori didn't respond immediately. "You were with her," she finally said. "That's what matters." Ethan stepped into the hallway and allowed himself to cry alone, standing against the wall, with the silence of the mansion around him and the specific weight of someone who had lost something and who at the same time knew that the last few months had been an unexpected gift. 3 months after Eleanor's death, the foundation opened its first mobile clinics. Tori had spent those 3 months building the program with the same attention she gave to everything. She had spoken with doctors, social workers, and families who had lost someone due to late diagnosis. She had designed a model that didn't depend on people reaching hospitals, but on hospitals reaching people. Ethan signed off on resources and made financial decisions. Tori built what those resources should fund. It was a collaboration that worked because each did what they knew how to do. The first mobile clinic left on a Tuesday morning for 3 underserved communities where early cancer detection screenings had never reached. Ethan and Tori were there at its departure. They watched the vehicle drive away down the street with the foundation's logo on the side. The name they had chosen was simple, Eleanor. No surnames or corporate references, just Eleanor. "Do you think it's right?" Ethan asked. "The name, everything." Tori looked at him. "I think it's the beginning of something that should have existed before," she said. "And I think the fact that it didn't exist before and exists now is what matters." Ethan nodded. They said nothing else for a moment. The vehicle had disappeared around the corner, but they both continued to look in that direction, as one looks at something one knows will continue, even if it can no longer be seen. "My mother would have said you arrived late," Ethan said. "And what do you say?" Ethan thought about the answer, with the honesty he had learned in a small room at 4 a.m. "That I arrived." Tori looked at him, and in that look was everything. Neither of them had yet said, and didn't need to say that Tuesday morning, in front of a mobile clinic named after a woman who had taught 2 people, each in their own way, that the time one has is exactly the time one chooses to use. The Eleanor Foundation grew faster than either of them had calculated. Not because Ethan had invested more than planned, though he had, but because the idea was correct in the specific sense that ideas are correct when they respond to something that exists and that no one had yet solved. The mobile clinics reached neighborhoods where people didn't have transportation to get to hospitals, or didn't have time because time was money when working by the day, or didn't trust the system, because the system had failed them enough times for distrust to be reasonable. Tori had designed the model with that reality at its center. These weren't clinics that waited for patients. They were clinics that went to find them with staff who spoke the right language, not the medical language that excludes, but the language of people who know they are talking to someone who understands them. Ethan learned this on a visit he made to the third clinic a month after its launch. Tori had taken him without fully telling him what he was going to see. She just told him to come. They arrived at a neighborhood on the city's outskirts, where the houses had the specific appearance of places where people build with what they have when they have something, and wait to have more to continue. The mobile clinic was parked on the community park's soccer field, which was the largest space in the neighborhood, and there was a line of people waiting with the patience of someone who has learned that waiting is part of the process, but that this morning, the wait was worth it. Ethan stood outside, observing. He saw a woman in her 50s enter the vehicle with the tense expression of someone afraid of what she might hear, and exit 20 minutes later with a paper in her hand and a different face, not exactly relieved, but with something, with information, with the difference between knowing and not knowing, which is the difference between being able to act and not being able to. He saw a young man who had brought his mother and was waiting outside with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on the vehicle, with the specific concentration of a son who doesn't know how to pray, but at that moment is doing something similar. He saw the doctor Tori had hired come out to the line to talk to the waiting people, not to rush the process, but to make the waiting time useful too, explaining what would happen inside, answering questions, making the unknown less threatening. Tori was beside him. "See the woman in the green dress," she said in a low voice. Ethan looked for her, an older woman alone, with a cloth bag in her lap. She came alone from 3 neighborhoods beyond here. She walked 40 minutes. Why didn't they tell her we could pick her up? She didn't have a phone to call. She found out from a neighbor and came. Tori paused. That's what it means for the clinic to exist. That someone walks 40 minutes because they know that at the end of those 40 minutes there's something that can change what's happening to them. Ethan looked at her. How many like her are there? Many. That's why we need more vehicles. How many more? Depends on how far you want to reach. Ethan looked at the line. How much would it cost to double the operation? Tori took out her notebook. She had the numbers. She always had the numbers because she had learned that ideas without numbers are just ideas, and ideas with numbers are plans. She gave them to him. Ethan reviewed them, approved. Tori looked at him. You don't have to decide today. I've already decided, Ethan said. It needs to be planned well. It's not just money, it's personnel, it's logistics. I know it's not just money, he said. That's why you plan it, and I finance it. He paused. How much time do you need, Tori? She thought. 3 months to do it right. 3 months. They continued to watch the clinic. The woman in the green dress entered the vehicle. The young man still had his eyes fixed on the door. Do you think about your mother much? Ethan asked. Every day, Tori said, but differently than before. Before, I thought about what I lost. Now I think about what she taught me without knowing she was teaching me. What did she teach you? That presence is the most valuable thing you can give someone. That it cannot be bought, delegated, or scheduled. She looked at the vehicle, and that when you have the possibility to be present for someone, you must be, because that time doesn't come back. Ethan nodded. The woman in the green dress left the vehicle with her paper in hand. She spoke for a moment with the doctor. She nodded several times. She headed back down the road she had come from, with 40 minutes of walking ahead of her, and the difference between knowing and not knowing stored on a paper inside her cloth bag. The first anniversary of Eleanor's death arrived on a Thursday in December. Ethan went to the cemetery alone in the morning. He brought market flowers, not florist flowers, because he had learned that market flowers are the ones someone chooses because they find them pretty, not because they are on any list. He stayed for a moment by the grave. He didn't speak aloud. He wasn't one to talk in cemeteries, but he was present, which was exactly what his mother had asked him for, and exactly what he had learned to do. That afternoon, he went to the foundation. Tori was in the office they had set up in a small space near the mansion, with white painted walls and plants in every window, because Tori put plants in every window of every place she spent time. She was reviewing clinic reports with the concentration of someone doing that work because it mattered to her, not because someone asked her to. She looked up when Ethan entered. How was it? Good, he said. Quiet. Tori nodded. Ethan looked at the office, the plants, the organized reports on the table, the board on the wall where Tori had pinned photographs of the families who had been through the clinics, not to expose them, but to remember that behind every number in the reports was a person. There was a photo in the center that Ethan knew. It was of Eleanor, one Tori had taken 6 months before she died on an afternoon when Eleanor was in a good mood and the sun was coming through the bedroom window at the right angle. She was looking at the camera with that calm expression she had had in her last months. the expression of someone who has found a way to be at peace with what is. "Why did you put her there?" Ethan asked. "Because she's the reason this exists," Tori said, "and because I think reasons deserve to be visible." Ethan looked at her. He had been looking at her for a year, not like the first day when she was the employee doing something he didn't understand, but with the accumulation of everything he had learned that year, her way of entering a room and knowing what was needed before anyone said it. Her honesty, which wasn't harshness but precision. Her ability to be truly present, completely, with no part of her somewhere else. "Tori," she looked at him, "I want to ask you something that has nothing to do with the foundation." Ask. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who looked for perfect words. He had learned that year that perfect words were often a way to postpone true ones. "Can I invite you to dinner? Not here, not at the mansion, out, somewhere you choose, not as a work meeting." Tori looked at him for a moment, not with surprise exactly, but with the honest assessment of someone who takes decisions seriously because she knows that decisions have real consequences. "Why do I choose the place? Because you've been making better decisions than mine for a year. It seems reasonable to follow the trend." Tori let out a brief, genuine laugh that Ethan had learned to distinguish from others because it was rare and therefore worth more. "Saturday," she said. "There's a restaurant near the market where I went with my mother several times. Simple food. Not the kind of place you're probably used to." "Perfect. Believe me, Tori, I've spent 50 years in the kinds of places I'm used to." He paused. "It's time to explore others." She looked at him. Then she went back to the reports. "Saturday at 8. Ethan nodded and walked towards the door. Ethan paused. "Your mother would be happy," Tori said without looking up from her papers. "Not about the foundation, about you." Ethan didn't respond. He stepped out onto the street where the cold December air had that specific scent of year-end that in other times had meant balance sheets and projections for the next cycle. That year it meant something else. It meant a Saturday at 8 p.m. at a restaurant near the market where a woman had gone with her mother several times, and which for that reason was exactly the right place. On Saturday, Ethan arrived 5 minutes early, not because he wanted to demonstrate punctuality, but because he had left with enough time to walk from where he parked his car, and walking had given him space to think about the difference between this moment and all similar moments in his previous life. In his previous life, dinners were instruments. They had objectives, they were measured by what they produced. The person across the table was a variable in a larger equation. This was different. This was simply dinner with a person he wanted to know better. Without an equation, without an objective, beyond being present. It was new, and he had learned that year that the new wasn't scary when one understood that fear of the new was actually fear of losing control, and that control was often another word for distance. The restaurant was exactly as Tori had described it. Wooden tables, warm light, the sound of an unpretentious kitchen at work, the kind of place where the food is good because someone makes it with attention, and not because someone designed it to impress. Tori arrived punctually, in a simple dress, her hair down, without the ponytail she wore for work. Ethan watched her enter, and thought there was something about her that was consistent in all contexts. She didn't change her posture or expression depending on where she was. She was the same person in Eleanor's room as in the foundation office, as in that restaurant. That, Ethan understood, was what it meant to have real character. They sat down. They ordered without consulting the menu too much, because Tori knew the place and recommended with the confidence of someone who knows what's worthwhile. They talked not about the foundation, not about work, but about other things. About the city where they both grew up, in different neighborhoods, with different lives, which nevertheless had things in common that neither had known until that night. About books, about a movie they had both seen at different times in their lives and interpreted in opposing ways that turned out to be complementary. About their mothers. Tori spoke of hers with the specific warmth of someone remembering someone they loved, and whose memory no longer hurt in the same way it had at first. "She taught me to make pierogies," she said, "not the efficient way, but the long way, which takes all day, and requires 2 people to be in the kitchen at the same time without rushing." "Do you still make them in December?" She paused. "Last year I made them with Eleanor. It was the first time she had ever made them. She told me it wasn't a family tradition." Ethan looked at her. "I didn't know that. It was a good afternoon." Tori smiled at the table. She was terrible with the dough, but she refused to admit it. Ethan laughed. It was a genuine laugh that escaped him before he could decide if it was appropriate, and because of that, it was exactly appropriate. "You're like her in that," Tori said. "In what?" "In that when she decided something was right, she wouldn't budge easily." "Is that a compliment?" "Depends on what it's used for. In your mother, it was always a compliment. In you, it's improving." Ethan looked at her. There was something in that sentence that was exactly the kind of honesty he had been receiving from her for a year, and which he had learned to value above any other type of communication. Do you think I'm improving? Tori genuinely thought about the answer. I think you're a different person than the one who arrived in that room and found something unexpected. She paused. And I think that difference is real and isn't to impress anyone, because there's no one watching who doesn't already know how you were before. You were watching, I was watching, he confirmed, and I see the difference. They finished dinner without rushing. They ordered dessert because Tori said the maple butter tart from that place was the main reason she had chosen that restaurant, and it turned out to be true. When they left, the night had the clean cold of December, and the neighborhood streets had the quiet movement of weekend evenings. They walked a block without a specific direction. Thank you, Ethan said. For dinner, for the year, he said. For being there when I didn't know I needed someone to be. Tori looked at him. I also learned things this year, she said. I didn't just give. What did you learn? She thought for a moment. That there are people who need someone to show them that the world can work differently, and that showing them that isn't a sacrifice. It's simply doing the right thing when you know how to do it. Ethan nodded. They stopped at the corner where their paths diverged. Next Saturday? Ethan asked. Tori looked at him with that honest assessment. That was her way of responding to everything that mattered. Next Saturday, she said, and continued on her way. Ethan stayed at the corner, looking in the direction she had gone for a moment. He thought of his mother telling him to learn to love before it was too late. He thought of how he had arrived late to many things that year, and he thought that late, when one finally arrives, is better than never. The Eleanor Foundation had 4 active mobile clinics that month, and a waiting list for 2 more. Tori had presented the model at a public health conference, and 3 organizations from other provinces had requested meetings to replicate it. Ethan had been at that conference sitting in the 3rd row, not as the funder introducing the speaker, but as someone who went to listen to a person who had important things to say. And as Tori spoke in front of 200 people with the same clarity and honesty with which she had spoken to him that first day in his study, Ethan thought of Eleanor in her wheelchair telling him that that young woman was the only person who had treated her like a human being. She was right, and he had had the undeserved and unexpected luck to arrive in time to learn the same thing.